Welcome to a world where love, loyalty, and lies collide. Every story here hides a heartbeat of truth, a family torn apart by betrayal, a marriage built on secrets, and a silence that costs everything. Step inside these walls, where smiles deceive and every whispered word leads to a shocking revelation. Here, every twist of fate exposes something raw, something unforgettable. You'll feel the pain, the power, and the quiet fire that rises after every heartbreak. These are stories that don't just entertain. They make you question the faces you trust and the promises you believe, because behind every perfect family portrait, there's always a shadow waiting to be seen. The call came late in the afternoon when the air was still heavy with plans and half-finished dreams. The table was scattered with wedding notes, colors chosen, flowers imagined, laughter rehearsed for a day that was supposed to happen next week. The phone's ring broke the quiet like a crack in glass. On the other end, a father's voice, steady but trembling beneath the weight of something unsaid. "It happened yesterday," he said, just that, 3 words. And the world tilted, erasing every trace of normalcy that had existed seconds before. There was silence, a kind that doesn't just fill the room but presses against the chest. Thoughts refused to align. The brother, his wedding, yesterday, every plan, every promise, every conversation suddenly felt like a lie that had been carefully performed. It wasn't just shock. It was betrayal, pure and raw, laced with confusion. The heart knew there was more to it, something deeper than a sudden change of date. The truth began to unravel in fragments. The brothers' wedding had been arranged quietly, rushed even, under the guidance of someone who shouldn't have had a say. Someone who had always stood too close, spoken too softly, and smiled too knowingly. The husband, his influence had always seeped into every corner of family decisions, dressed up as concern or protection. But now, that influence looked like control. The father's words replayed over and over, each echo carrying a sting sharper than before. He was there, he had added, his tone tight, careful. He didn't have to explain who he was. The picture formed too clearly, the husband standing by the brother's side, arranging, deciding, orchestrating. The same man who claimed he wanted peace in the family, who said distance from them was necessary for harmony. The man who insisted on separating one heart from the rest of her bloodline. The betrayal wasn't just the wedding. It was the realization that the entire family had been moved like pieces on a board. Every word, every argument, every apology had been part of a slow, deliberate design. There were secrets hidden behind his measured tone, truths wrapped in his charm. The same voice that once promised devotion had now rewritten what loyalty meant. The house felt colder that evening. The wedding invitations sat untouched, their edges curling as if time itself refused to hold them. Questions churned. Why so soon? Why in silence? Why without a word? The answers hid behind the husband's calm smile, behind the gentle insistence that it's better this way. Better for whom? The father's call had not just shattered normalcy. It had exposed the rot beneath the surface. The carefully built life, once glowing with pride and promise, now flickered under the shadow of deceit. Somewhere between trust and truth, something had died. And as the line went dead, so did the last trace of belief that love could survive without honesty. The wedding no one was meant to know about had already happened before the truth found its way through the cracks. Photos surfaced first, smiling faces, flower garlands, the kind of joy that should have been shared, not hidden. The brothers stood there, radiant and proud, but something about the picture felt wrong. The eyes told a different story, uneasy, restrained, almost rehearsed. It wasn't a celebration. It was an arrangement disguised as love. The whispers came next, carried by relatives who spoke too softly and paused too long between sentences. The ceremony hadn't been planned by the family. It had been organized quietly, under someone else's watchful eye. The details didn't match. The sudden rush, the secret venue, the guest list that included people who shouldn't have been there and excluded those who always should. The realization was bitter. What was supposed to be a union of hearts had been crafted in manipulation and sealed with deceit. The one thread that connected every hidden move was the husband. His voice had lingered in every decision. The timing, the location, the secrecy, it all bore his signature calmness, the kind that always carried an undertone of control. There had been late night calls, unexplained absences, and too many moments where his words twisted situations in ways that favored him. Each time, it had been dismissed as overthinking, as unnecessary doubt. But now the pattern was undeniable. He had convinced everyone that silence was the key to peace. He had spoken about keeping the wedding private to avoid unnecessary drama, insisting it was best for the family's dignity. And somehow, he had persuaded them all, especially the brother, who had always looked up to him, trusted him, almost idolized him. The manipulation was slow, deliberate, gentle enough to seem like guidance. The day the truth came out, the house was filled with a silence thicker than grief. The family gathered, but no one spoke of betrayal aloud. The mother's tears fell quietly. The father's disappointment hung in the air like a weight no one could lift. Yet the husband stood there, calm, explaining everything as if nothing was wrong. Every word sounded rehearsed, like he had prepared his defense long before the questions arrived. He said it was for everyone's good, that things had to be done this way. But his eyes gave him away, cold, unflinching, and unbothered by the storm he'd created. There was no remorse, only control. And for the first time, the silence that had always surrounded him began to make sense. It wasn't peace he wanted, it was power. Every toast raised at that secret wedding had carried a hidden bitterness, a silent betrayal. The laughter in those photographs now sounded hollow, echoing with the ghosts of what had been stolen. And beneath it all, one truth settled like dust after a storm. Sometimes, the people trusted most don't just hide secrets. They build them. The house had always felt warm from the outside. Miles at the door, the smell of dinner, laughter echoing through the rooms. To anyone looking in, it was the picture of harmony, but perfection is often just, well, rehearsed chaos. Every smile had timing, every word had weight, every silence had purpose, and beneath it all, there was a lie so perfectly built it almost felt like truth. It began with small things, a story told differently, a detail that didn't match, moments that didn't quite fit together. Each time questions rose, they were gently dismissed, soothed away by calm explanations and soft promises. That voice, steady and certain, could turn suspicion into guilt and guilt into apology. It was a gift, the kind that made lies sound like care. That voice belonged to him, the one everyone trusted most. The husband who always seemed to have the right words, the right answers, the right control. He had woven himself into the fabric of the family, thread by thread, until no decision was made without his approval. His opinions were treated as wisdom, his silences as judgment. And while the family believed he was protecting them from outsiders, he was quietly building walls, ones that kept truth from ever finding its way in. Over time, the laughter became thinner, strained around the edges. The father stopped questioning. The mother smiled less. The brother withdrew, his confidence replaced with caution. Each of them held pieces of unease they couldn't name, because the person who caused it was also the one who comforted them through it. It was control disguised as care. When the wedding secret came out, it wasn't just about the brother marrying in silence. It was about realizing who had pulled the strings. The one who had preached unity had been planting division. The one who claimed loyalty had been feeding on control. Every false reassurance, every hidden plan, every whispered manipulation led back to him. The realization didn't come as an explosion. It came as a slow, suffocating quiet, the kind that settles in when the truth finally stops hiding. He had crafted a family built not on trust but on obedience, and they had all played their parts well, believing his every word. The affection had been real once, perhaps, but somewhere along the line it became a weapon. A way to keep everyone smiling while standing over a foundation of lies. The night the truth surfaced, his calmness didn't waver. He stood there, explaining the lies like they were acts of love, justifications spilling out effortlessly. And for a moment, it almost worked again, the way he could twist guilt into gratitude. But this time, the silence didn't save him. It exposed him. The family built on lies had finally cracked, and in the shards of what was left, only one thing was certain. Truth doesn't destroy a family. It only reveals who really did. Rumors always start quietly, soft whispers that linger in corners, words that hover between truth and denial. At first, they were easy to dismiss. People talk, they twist things, they exaggerate. But when whispers turn into patterns, and patterns begin to align with what the heart already fears, they stop sounding like lies. They start sounding like warnings. The man once seen as the family's protector had become its quiet storm. His presence used to bring comfort, his words authority. He had built a reputation on kindness, patience, and charm. But charm is the most dangerous disguise. It hides the intentions of those who know how to use it. And he knew every compliment, every act of affection had a purpose. Every silence had a weight. What looked like love began to resemble control dressed in devotion. The first real sign came from an unexpected place. A friend of the family, hesitant, apologetic, whispering things that sounded too cruel to be true. But truth has a way of revealing itself in the smallest detail. Late night calls he couldn't explain, messages that vanished too quickly, money moved quietly under names that didn't belong. Each fragment alone meant nothing, but together they formed the shape of betrayal. Still, he stood tall, unshaken, his calm voice weaving explanations like silk. He smiled while denying everything, the kind of smile that made others doubt their own instincts. "You're overthinking," he would say, his tone smooth enough to erase suspicion. And for a while it worked. Everyone wanted to believe him. The family needed to, because accepting the truth meant admitting they had built their lives around a lie. But the mask began to slip. The charm that once captivated started to feel rehearsed. The gestures that once soothed began to sting. There was something behind his eyes, cold calculation, not love. He wasn't protecting the family, he was positioning himself within it, turning loyalty into leverage, turning trust into power. Every decision that seemed selfless had hidden motives stitched beneath. It wasn't just betrayal of the heart. It was betrayal of blood, of bonds, of belief. The brothers' sudden wedding, the family's fractures, the secrets that kept multiplying. They all led back to him. The realization came like a slow bleed, painful and quiet. The man everyone defended had been the one orchestrating every rift. When confronted, he didn't flinch. He didn't plead. He simply looked at everyone as if they were children who'd failed to understand. His voice, calm and even, dripped with the same confidence that once felt like safety. "I did what needed to be done," he said, and that was the moment everything fell apart. The whispers had been right all along. The man once trusted to protect had been the one everyone needed protection from, and the shadow he cast was darker than anyone ever dared to see. Silence had always been the unspoken rule of the family. When things went wrong, no one raised their voice. When pain surfaced, it was buried beneath polite smiles and half-finished sentences. Everyone knew that silence kept the peace, or at least, that's what they were made to believe. But silence isn't peace. It's a cage built to protect the wrong people. And in this family, that silence came with a cost. After the secret wedding, the house felt colder. No one argued, but no one spoke freely either. The brothers stopped visiting, the parents avoided questions, and every conversation tiptoed around what had already been done. The wedding that was supposed to unite two families had done the opposite. It split them clean down the middle. Yet no one dared to say what they really felt, because the one person who had caused it all still controlled the narrative. The husband carried himself with quiet authority, pretending nothing was wrong. He would sit at the table, ask about everyone's day, and speak about moving on, as if betrayal could be washed away with casual conversation. His voice still carried that familiar calm, the kind that demanded agreement without ever needing to raise its tone. He didn't need to shout. His silence was louder than any anger could ever be. The family had learned that questioning him came with consequences, not visible ones, but subtle, cutting ones. A look, a word, a decision made without warning. He had a way of punishing without ever appearing cruel, of isolating people while pretending to protect them. Over time, everyone learned that it was safer to stay quiet, to endure, to pretend. That's how silence became the currency of survival in that house. But the weight of unspoken truth doesn't stay hidden forever. Small cracks began to form. The father's disappointment turned into resentment. The mother's quiet tears turned into avoidance. Even the brother, the one who had gone along with everything, began to see through the illusion. There were stories whispered in corners about how decisions had been manipulated, how love had been traded for control, how one man's ambition had rewritten an entire family's story. Every time someone tried to speak, the husband was there, calm, patient, and terrifyingly composed. "We've had enough drama," he would say, smiling like it was kindness. "Let's not make things worse." And so they didn't. They let the truth rot inside them, piece by piece, but silence has a breaking point. The family's loyalty, once their pride, became their downfall. And when the truth finally surfaced, when every hidden word came spilling out, it didn't bring peace, it brought destruction. Every bond that had been held together by quiet submission snapped all at once. Because the price of silence isn't peace, it's the slow death of everything that once held meaning. Some betrayals don't fade. They carve themselves into memory, shaping every breath that follows. At first, there was only confusion, a desperate need to understand how everything so carefully built could collapse in silence. But confusion doesn't last forever. It transforms, it sharpens, it turns into something colder, something stronger. That was the beginning of it, the quiet birth of revenge. After the wedding, after the whispers, after the lies had tangled themselves into every corner of the family, the air changed. There was no more pretending not to see. The charm that once covered his deceit no longer worked. Every smile he gave felt rehearsed, every word measured, every gesture calculated. The man who once promised to protect had used that trust like a weapon. And now he stood unshaken, certain that his control was still complete. He believed silence would last forever. He believed no one would dare to confront him. He had mistaken fear for loyalty, and that mistake would cost him everything. The family might have stayed quiet, but silence was never the same as forgiveness. Beneath the stillness, something began to stir, a need for truth, for justice, for balance. It started small, a few questions asked at the right moments, a few truths whispered where they could echo. Every piece of his manipulation began to surface, slowly, almost delicately, until the picture he had painted began to crack. The brother who once followed him began to doubt. The parents who once trusted him began to watch, and he could feel it, control slipping, little by little. There was a certain satisfaction in watching the mask falter. The man who had prided himself on calm now struggled to maintain it. His explanations grew shorter, his patience thinner. The lies that had always come so easily began to contradict each other. The house that once obeyed him started to question. The power he fed on began to starve. Every interaction became a performance, and he was losing his audience. The family dinners grew tense. The once gentle voice that had kept everyone in check now sounded defensive. His eyes, once cold with confidence, carried a flicker of unease. It was subtle, but it was there, the realization that his reign of quiet control was ending. There was no need for shouting, no need for confrontation. Revenge didn't require noise, it required precision. The same silence he had used to control others now turned against him. Truth spread like a quiet flame, slow, steady, unstoppable. Every secret he had buried found its way to the surface. And when the moment finally came, when every mask had fallen and every lie stood naked in the light, there was no triumph, only balance, because revenge was never about destruction. It was about truth reclaiming its place. The beginning of revenge wasn't a declaration. It was a promise kept in silence, finally fulfilled. If this story shook you, don't forget to hit like, subscribe, and turn on the bell, because the next secret is already unfolding. Each episode reveals another hidden truth, another betrayal waiting to surface. Stay tuned. The revenge has only just begun.